Well, good morning, everybody. I'm going to run today's forecast video a little differently. After reviewing some of the big stories we've got going on in the near-term forecast, I would like to show you some of the model performance issues that have really removed a lot of the trust in any sort of sub-seasonal forecast. I want you to understand what's going on. And then I want to think through the things that might be influencing this upcoming fall. And again, take another look at those ocean temperatures in North Pacific. And I'm going to finish with a bit on South America. So the map we've been looking at here, just a shade before 6 a.m., this is the National Weather Service all hazards map. We have our heat issues that are going on in the west. There's significant flooding going on here. An active southwest monsoonal setup going on now for the first time in a while. And here, that is our first kind of frost advisory of the season. That is in parts of, up there in northern Minnesota up toward the Arrowhead. This morning, just thinking it through, the National Weather Service did pick up on this. You can see that their newest forecasts came out and did put down a couple of patchy frost areas here. But remember, when I make this map, what I'm looking for is anything at or below 35 degrees Fahrenheit, because you can sometimes get those low-lying areas hitting a frost. So I was watching the surface obs early this morning. This was the kind of 3 hours leading up to sunrise, and we were down here. I just saw a few of these stations dipping into the 36, 37, 38 degree range, and it was pretty chilly. I always watch this region. I watch this region of Wisconsin as well. They can sometimes just bottom out here, and also in the north woods of Wisconsin, some of our earliest frost regions when you think about the upper Midwest alone. Okay, I'm sure there was patchy frost here this morning. Just wanted to point out what some of the service observations look like. We do know this for the next 10 days. Tremendous heat going into the northwest, going into western Canada, and some very cool and also extremely wet areas right in through here. And this is how it's going to be for a little while. In fact, if you look at the 10-day anomalies, we have very, very sharp contrast across this line right here. The models have been very clear on this for a while. You get to the north and east of that line, things are very dry. You get to the south and west of it, and it's very, very wet. There are no new major tropical systems to be discussing coming out of the Atlantic, but I do want to keep an eye on this one, Juliet, that's coming out of the Pacific. Take a look at the monsoonal circulation here, though. There's quite a bit of thunderstorm activity that will be happening throughout the Intermountain West as we go forward, but there's a flash drought scenario that's taking place in through here, and despite the cooler weather, we're going to see some very, very dry conditions, which are going to amplify what has already been very dry weather in some of these places. So that's kind of our bigger picture of, I think, what's going on that we need to pay close attention to. And again, just to reiterate, we have Ferdinand that's moving out to open ocean. We have a 10% chance on this tropical system, or let's call it cluster of tropical thunderstorms, but no models are developing this. And therefore, I don't see a whole lot happening in the Atlantic. In fact, I think there's a little bit of a lid, a suppression on the Atlantic for some time now. Now, it doesn't mean you can't get tropical convection inside of it. It's just kind of suppressing it a bit. And we just need to consider what that's going to mean as we work our way through the end of August and start September. Okay, a couple of neat things. Ocean temperature change in the last week. We have got a couple of stories that we need to continue to watch. One is La Nina. We talked a lot about that at the end of last week. In fact, most of last week. And then this is the cold water trail from Hurricane Erin, and it churned up a lot of cold water, and extracted a lot of cold water from the ocean surface. Just take a look at that. But I'll be honest with you, the top thing that just rents a lot of space in my head is this. So I'd like to show you a little bit about this, okay? The North Pacific warmth. If we go back and look at some of the historical records from this, I'm going to show you using ERA 5 data. In fact, let me tell you where the region I'm going to do the analysis. Over there it is. That pocket right there of the North Pacific. If you look back over history to 1940, understanding this is a reanalysis product, okay? We just take note of a couple things. From the 40s through the early 70s, we were kind of up, down, up, down, up, down. Then you come into the 70s and 80s, and there was a time period of, just cold ocean temperatures in the North Pacific. And during that time frame, we did have some sizable central U.S. droughts. I'm thinking about 76. I'm thinking about 80 and 83. There's 83. And then here is 87 toward 88. And then you notice that after about 1988, we saw, a pretty significant warm-up. And now what's the time period over? May, June, July, August, and September. Interesting thing to take note of here. When you're looking for really, really dry time periods in parts of the Midwest, for example, 17 was a very dry one. in parts of the Midwest. And we all know that like 10, 11, 12, especially 12, see these were downturns. But overall, we can't ignore this shape versus this shape, right? So there's clearly been, on a climate scale, right, 10, 15, 20 years, there's been some shifting around of these North Pacific Ocean temperatures, and for a while, they've been increasing. And I want to show you something about this. So I went out and I said, well, let's go from 71 to 88. So I just started here and I went to there. Most of those years had below normal ocean temperatures in the North Pacific Ocean compared to average. So what happened in those Septembers and falls? What did they tend to look like? Well, when it was cool there, all right, what we tended to see across North America was cool. And one of the big reasons for that was just a slight southward shift in the overall position of the jet. So you can imagine what I'm talking about here. If this is so warm, where's the greatest thermal contrast in the atmosphere? Well, it's farther to the north. So the jet wants to live here. If this was cooler, well, the jet would just shift a little bit farther to the south. The jet stream is always responding to the low-level temperature gradient. And if you don't have one, it's going to go north. And that's what this has done. So that's the first piece of this. What about the precipitation? Or excuse me, what's happened since then? Let's do that first. So how about let's start in 1990, what did I do, 6, and I said let's just go all the way to 2024. So this was 71 to 88, and this is what the average composite temperature has been since 1996. In other words, warmer September, October, November for most of the U.S., save the corner of the southeast and a lot of the west coast. No discernible composite anomalies in those areas. But for this section of the country, sure, it's been warmer. Now let's talk precipitation. This is interesting to me. 71 to 88, the cooler time period. Northern California, significantly wetter. In fact, so was a lot of the South, into this area. And sections of the Mid-South, Midwest. It was drier along the coastal Carolinas in composite during that. And likely the reason for this was that during this time frame, maybe, I'll just have to go back and look, there weren't a lot of hurricanes. Now, there were some very notable hurricanes, but overall, when you look at the composite, maybe that's what's going on here. Now, let's do the same thing we did a moment ago. Let's go from the 96 to 2024. And what you notice is there's a lack of a signal. You go, well, wait a minute. I do kind of see some drier weather in here. And sure enough, I think parts of the Mississippi Basin and its major tributaries have seen more often than not some drier falls during that time frame. But what it probably means is that precipitation variability since 1996 has been very high. So you have these major swings up and down offsetting each other, giving you a composite value of near zero. I think that's important information to look at overall. Because as I stare through this and try to piece together what it means, I'm like, okay, our models are doing this. This is the newest September, October, November outlook for this year that was just issued by the IRI Multi-Model Probability Forecast Group. And they've got, drier here. They're drier in British Columbia. They've got wetter in pockets of the Midwest and in the Northeast. And you can also see wetter maybe along the Gulf Coast over toward Florida. Drier in the Appalachian Mountains. I mean, we've had multiple dry falls in this region. So I look at that, and I want to know how much trust I can put in it, right? And how much trust I can put in other models, because this is the forecast of temperatures. Now, as you look at it, yes, the color bar gets it looks extreme pretty quickly, but we make these color bars just to show contrast. So please don't think that like this is just 1,000 degrees, right? So we have to be careful with this, but it's hot, Four Corner States, hot Northeast, cooler Canadian, getting into the Canadian Prairie, coming out of the mountains. So that, and to be honest with you, this is kind of the summary of all of the models that we've seen predicting this. Now, can I show you what happened a year ago? This was the forecast for September, October, November that was issued last August for last September, October, November. Drier Four Corner States, drier here. Now, did you notice something? Back-to-back falls, very similar forecasts. That's one thing we have to look at. Here's the other thing. The European model. This was a year ago. The model run on August 1st, predicting September, October, November 2024, was wetter. It was overall slightly drier in through this area, wetter in the Midwest, wetter along the coast. And we just need to review what happened. This is what the first 2 months of that time frame looked like, September and October. It was bone dry here and very, very dry. I mean, one of the driest falls on record in Midwest, upper Midwest, northern plains, actually the whole of the plains, and then very dry in the Northeast. Now, what's going on here is this includes Milton and this includes Helene. So two major hurricanes came through and wiped out, this particular area in terms of precipitation. Now, that's only the first 2 months of the time frame. So then we say, well, what if you include November? Well, remember November a year ago was extremely wet in this area. And still, overall, we look at this and say, well, that was the European model prediction. And you go, nope, it didn't get it. And this was the IRI multi-model probability forecast. And again, we'd say, nope, it didn't get it. And I'm trying to relate all of this to tell you that I think that the models are, well, first of all, fall is difficult to predict anyway. And all the seasons are. I don't know why I just picked fall. We're terrible at this. We're learning, but we're not good. But I think there's a lot to do with this change in the North Pacific driving some of the biases that we see here. And we just need to consider that going forward. Because the last 7 days, okay, now this only goes to Sunday morning, and yes, there were huge storms that ripped through like Oklahoma last night that are not shown on this. But this is the last 7 days of precipitation as a percent of normal. Here's the last 14 days. And remember, for some reason this morning, the AHPS is missing data here. That's what these minus 10,000s are. But there's been some places that have gone over very dry. And we talked about this in the last week. This has been one of the spots that we've seen flash drought now that's getting on 40 days here. Very dry in parts of the Northeast, pockets in the Southern Plains, and then the lackluster performance of the Southwest monsoon so far. So I'm trying to weigh all of this and make some sort of assessment about where it's going, because the next 15 days, look at the rainfall. And that's just through this week. We're going to watch for very heavy rain here. We're going to see these storms just ripping off every day throughout the Intermountain West. And there's going to be a stretch that goes, through parts of the Midwest, all the way down here to the Mid-Atlantic, where look, notice my cursor isn't showing anything, because I don't tell it to show anything if the model's predicting 0. And very, very dry here, just overall. And that's out 216 hours in the forecast. That goes all the way to September 2nd. And even as I play it out farther, you're like, oh, look, it's filling in. No, that is a byproduct of the model. It always attempts to do that the farther out you go. It's very rare that it doesn't do that. And so you look at that and just start to weigh it against, what was the prediction? So I want to remind you that the prediction from even one of our sub-seasonal models run just 10 days ago was telling us that this whole region was going to be wet and it was going to be dry down here. See that? So this is a sub-seasonal model run just 10 days ago trying to predict the time frame I just showed you, which I know the color bars shift, but this is drying through there. The wetter conditions are here. It's not dry down here. There's storms that are going to be happening down here. So we're off. The models are off, and it's alarming, because the prediction for temperatures for the week that starts at the end of August and goes through the first 4 days of September was cooler west overall, and all the heat was going to be in the Southern Plains. And now we know that the forecast looks like this for the next 5 days, and that day 5 through 10, which is the same time period of the map that you just saw. And this goes out day 10 through 15. So I want to be very clear on what we're doing. We have a suite of weather forecast models. You know them. They're like the GFS Ensemble, the European Ensemble, the Artificial Intelligence. Those are all what we call medium-range weather forecast models. They predict the next 15 days. We have sub-seasonal models, which there's a GFS extended and there's a European extended. The European extended is often called the weeklies, okay? And they're trying to predict out, up to 30 to 45 days. And it's those models. Those are the ones where we're going, what are you doing, right? They're out. Now, there have been times where I've had almost complete trust in them. They seem to pick up on a pattern and nail it, but they've missed. And I don't know. I'm going to take a stab at this. I want you to understand how skeptical I am about what I'm about to tell you. But I don't know, but I think so much of this has to do with the movement around of the MJO. And I could have picked anything and tried to do some attribution. I just think that the MJO is right now a more dominant factor. And I think it's linked up with what's going on with La Nina. So here you go. This is what I want to be aware of. The MJO for the last few weeks has been sweeping through here. And now it's parked, somewhere in this vicinity. And it's going to be sweeping out and coming back around. Okay, so what does that mean? It was over here near Africa, moved through phases 1 and 2 into the Indian Ocean. The newest model initialization is right here in phase 3. And there seems to be something that says this is going to sweep its way around and get back into phases. We'll go through quickly, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And if it does that, if it makes that turn, I'm curious if there is a lag and how do we assess it. So watch, okay? This is when it was in phase 2 recently. Okay, so right over here, earlier in this month of August. And what's interesting was that was the time period where the flow was coming through here. Remember, we were putting the rain in across Canada, putting out the Canadian wild, well, not putting them out, but putting some rain on them. And we were very hot under a larger ridge here. I mean, don't forget, not 7-8 days ago, during most of the central U.S. summer fair time, it was scorching hot. So I start to see that there's some sort of link to that. Then we get a little bit later and we get into phase 3 and 4. And what happened, right? The ridge starts to back its way up. And if we come out here and just let's say that, we're here, we're phase, we're somewhere close to phase 3 or phase 4. Okay. What does it mean? Well, that ridge, as we know, has now slid over to the southwest. We're getting the southwest monsoon around it. The flow is going over the top. And this trough, which is all the colder air, well, I mean, it kind of lines up. We're getting flow like this over the top of this. And it's cooled down so much of the eastern 2/3 of the country while the west is hot. Now, here's my question. So that's just an analysis of how the MJO's linking up with the current pattern and almost with no lag. But let's say it just sweeps through 5, 6, 7, and 8. And by early September, the first week of September, second week of September, it's in phase 8-1. So what I want to say is let's go over here and say, well, let's go if it goes into 5 and then 6, right? We need to get into September. Or excuse me, I should have done it here. 5, then 6. Do we see this behavior? I don't think so. I don't think we see a true phase 6. And the reason behind that, I'm just going to show you one other thing here. If I go to the Ag Weather website and go to more weather, I think that the European model probably has it right. In other words, it doesn't come way out into 5, 6. It just scoots across here, but ends up back over in phase 8-1. You're going, Eric, get to the point. What are you trying to tell me? Well, if we get over into phase 8 by September, or maybe into phase 1 by mid-September, or, something in here, I think there's a chance that mid-September has got another big shot of cold air coming through the midsection of the country. That's all to tell you that there's some odd sense that I would be aware of that the middle 2 weeks of September having another cold shot. And when that happens, if it happens, and it's linked up with the MJO just getting back over here, I think you just need to be aware of the risk of some cooler air, and that gives us a northern tier United States frost chance. That's all. And I'm not making a big deal about it. There's no hype. There's no chaos. I'm just telling you, I think you are on a pretty wild roller coaster of temperatures going forward, and I want to watch that mid-September timeframe. So, okay, is there another wild card? In fact, let me show it to you. This is the trade winds going on with our nice easterly wind burst that says, hey, La Nina is there. There's something going on. But I've been watching this area lately for any sort of tropical development. And some of the models, you saw me flash this a moment ago, are attempting to get something to build in here. Now, here's what I want you to kind of add to the discussion we just had. This is the time of year that if we end up getting a tropical system that starts moving its way and then it curls north through Japan, it gets into the North Pacific or the Bering Sea, usually about 10 to 12 days after it gets here and it's forecast to do that, we have a big system that rolls east of the Rocky Mountains toward the East Coast. And I just want you to be aware of the fact that I think we need to watch the tropics, not only in the Atlantic, which is suppressed right now, but also in the Pacific. Okay, if you are confused, that's fine. We'll take the week to kind of build on this narrative. But I wanted to give you my latest thought process and why I am so kind of disenchanted with the weather forecast models right now. So where are we? Let's come back to the near term. Look at the storms yesterday. Nasty ones that rolled through parts of Oklahoma here. This is early this morning. Look at the rain shield that's moving through Kansas and Oklahoma. We see that they have 3 days in a row, 1, 2, 3, this region of having the risk of excessive rain, although not the risk of the major severe weather outbreak. We do take note that the short-term forecast models are just pulling this moisture around, wrapping it up against the frontal boundary that's draped here. And this is through the rest of the day today into tonight and tomorrow morning. Look at this rain coming into this area. Very focused. There's going to be a hard cutoff on the northern side of this for a lot of folks. But just every afternoon, storms explode here. So from the Sierra Nevada through Nevada into the Four Corners states, Wyoming, Idaho, we're all going to get in on this. And you're just going to see storms going across the west. And as we get out there toward the middle of the week, Wednesday, this is where things land. And it's just a reminder that the 7-day forecast, look at that line right there. It's going to be a sharp cutoff to the north. So all of this is kind of your monsoonal thunderstorm. Very wet coming off the front range. Expect hail with this as normal. But the wettest conditions here. And you get just north of it all the way through that corridor, and we're dry. And this goes back into the Canadian prairie as well. No major tropical systems to talk about. But when we think about probabilities, this is the chance it's staying under 1/10 of an inch over the next 10 days. So, I mean, this is just a hair south of, or right along I-70 here. Very, very dry. 90% chance of staying under 1/10 of an inch. And that extends all the way to the mid-Atlantic and goes back, look at that, all the way into Alberta and Saskatchewan and British Columbia. Now, on the wetter side of it, there's the next 10 days, probability of 1 inch, 2 inches, 4 inches. And we can see offshore the wet conditions as well. As we look out a bit farther, I just want to show you the pattern. This is now the European model height pattern. We just can't seem to get these troughs to hit the northwest. But overall, I got a block North Pacific. Can you see the high here with lows to the south of it? There's one there. There's one there. That's actually a little tiny omega. And then what we get is flow like this. This is drier air from this direction. The frontal boundary gets pinched into here. And this is early September. And it doesn't want to leave. See the high over low. So that's why the week 2 forecasts all look very similar, although the AI model's been bouncing all over the place. I'm going to ask you to kind of take the AI model with a grain of salt right now, because you notice that the CPC, the European ensemble, and the GFS all have very similar outlooks. The AI is the outlier. Temperature-wise, look at the min temperatures. The min temperature this morning, by the way, up here in northern Minnesota was 25, not minus 25, 25. Very, very hot out west. That's Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning, some cold air coming in here for this time of year. You know, it's 10 to 15 degrees cooler than average. And then we get into the end of the weekend. That's Friday, Saturday. This is your Labor Day weekend. That's what the temperatures do. And the max, just to show you again, this is all cloud cover and rain dominated here today. Heat in the Columbia Basin. That's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Look at that rain just hanging around. And look at the contrast, 72 to 96. Look at that. That's Thursday going into Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So your weekend, if you're in this part of the country, yes, wet here, but man, these are beautiful temperatures. Do want to point out, I mentioned that the AI model's going a bit bonkers. Not bonkers, that's a terrible phrase. It's got a different solution. If you look at the matrix here, so this is the next 5 days, day 5 through 10, day 10 through 15, European model, GFS ensemble, bottom is the AI. Look at that cold coming in here. Like this is September 4 through 9. Now you watch tomorrow, it may have a different solution for that because that's a single model run. I will be processing very soon the AI ensemble, so we have that to add to our little arsenal here of weather forecast models. So I want to finish up. What are my last slides on? They're going to be on South America. Now if you look at the wind right now, this is the big high pressure cell. Yes, it goes a different direction compared to the northern hemisphere. That will drive the the Brazilian monsoon. Now later this season, that flow comes around like this, and it draws on moisture that's here in the tropics, pulls it across the Amazon, which is here, and then into the Cerrado, into this region. This is not the right setup. See how the flow's going like this? What it's doing is it's pulling across some relatively dry air that's been there for about a month. Okay, so that flow is going in that direction. So the point is to say that over the next 14 days, the models which have been predicting this all to be wet are not. They're just not there now. So into early September, no. Wetter along the coast, but drier in the interior. Wetter down here. Now, what has every long-range weather forecast model said about the beginning of September? It was going wet there and dry here. Again, just more evidence of these subseasonal models and their woes. So I'll just show you the newest one. This is the outlook for September. What did it do? Went back to dry and kept this wet. I'm just going to tell you, great, but I have no trust in what this just predicted. I just don't. So will there be an early monsoon? You're going to have to put a lot of hope into this forecast model. Okay, one last thing to think about here. If the Brazilian monsoon gets going, what it will take is the high pressure cell, which is here, coming a little bit closer, sitting there and tightening up so that we start to bring this flow around. But until we start to see better moisture coming out of this region, it's hard to really get the monsoon cranking. It really, really helps, though, if the MJO goes back over into those phases that take the lid off of this area and start to make it rain, make more precipitation. But I'm going to cover that in videos later on this week and next week so we can kind of get a sense of it. So you want to know what today's forecast was about? It was about that. Everything subseasonal, throw a big question mark at. That's it. Talk to you tomorrow. Thanks.